If you've been carrying everything on your own shoulders lately, if you're exhausted from trying to hold it all together, and nothing you do seems to be working anymore, this message is for you. Because what if the breaking point you're experiencing right now isn't a sign that you're failing? What if it's actually God removing your ability to rely on yourself so you can finally learn to trust Him? And here's the part most people get wrong. This season isn't about you needing more faith. It's about God removing the illusion that you ever had control. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why God hasn't stopped this season and why that's actually good news. You wake up every morning and the weight is already there. Before your feet hit the floor, you're mentally organizing the day, calculating what needs to get done, figuring out how you're going to manage everything that's falling apart. Your career demands more than you have to give. Your relationships feel strained because you're running on empty. Financially, you're doing everything right, but it still feels like you're barely keeping your head above water. And spiritually, you're so busy trying to fix everything that you haven't had a real conversation with God in weeks. You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're actually incredibly strong. That's the problem. You've become so good at handling things on your own that you've forgotten what it feels like to need God for anything beyond emergencies. Prayer has become a formality, a quick check-in, a ritual you perform when you remember. But a real relationship, that requires dependency, and you haven't been dependent in a long time. Here's what most people won't tell you. The reason you're overwhelmed right now, the reason everything feels harder than it should, it's because God is intentionally letting you reach the end of yourself. Not to punish you, not because He's angry, but because self-reliance has become your invisible idol, and He loves you too much to let you keep worshiping it. Listen carefully. When was the last time you truly needed God? Not wanted Him, not preferred His help, but actually needed Him because you had zero other options. For most of us, it's been years. We've built lives that function perfectly well without divine intervention. We've become experts at problem solving, at hustling, at grinding our way through obstacles. And somewhere along the way, we stopped praying like we need Him and started praying like we're giving Him updates. This is the spiritual principle most of us miss. God doesn't respond to perfect prayers. He responds to dependent hearts. You can have all the right words, all the right posture, all the right theology, but if you're still convinced deep down that you've got this handled, He's going to let you keep trying until you realize you don't. You've built a life that works without God. There's a moment in Scripture that explains exactly what's happening to you right now. The disciples are in a boat, and a storm hits. But here's what's interesting. Jesus doesn't immediately calm the storm. He lets them struggle. He lets them row against the wind until their arms are burning and their strength is gone. Why? Because they needed to reach the end of their own ability before they could truly understand His power. When Jesus finally shows up, walking on water, their response isn't just relief, it's revelation. They worship Him, not because He saved them from discomfort, but because He revealed that their self-sufficiency was always an illusion. That's the shift God is making in you right now. That's where you are. In the boat, rowing hard, exhausted, wondering why God isn't showing up the way you expected. But what if He's already there? What if the struggle itself is the answer? What if He's waiting for you to stop rowing and start surrendering? Let's talk about what God removes when He's trying to break your dependence on yourself. First, He removes your safety nets. Those people you always call when things go wrong. Suddenly unavailable. That backup plan you had, it falls through. That skill you always relied on, it stops working. You feel the panic, the fear, because you're used to having options. You're used to having control. But God is stripping away everything you've been using as a substitute for Him. This isn't cruelty. This is love. Because as long as you have a plan B, you'll never fully trust plan A. As long as you have someone else to lean on, you'll never lean completely on God. He's not taking things away to leave you empty. He's taking things away so you'll finally turn to the one who's been waiting all along. Don't rush past this. Second, he removes your sense of control. You're a planner. You like knowing what's next. You like having clarity. But lately, nothing makes sense. You pray for direction and hear silence. You ask for confirmation and get nothing. You try to discern his will and feel like you're walking in fog. And it's maddening, because you're wired to manage, to organize, to strategize. But God is teaching you something deeper than planning. He's teaching you obedience without understanding. There's a profound difference between trusting God when you can see the path and trusting Him when you can't. The first is preference. The second is faith. Right now, He's refining your faith by removing your ability to see what's coming. Because true dependence doesn't ask for the blueprint. It asks for His presence and moves forward anyway. Third, He silences the voices you've been relying on for validation. You're used to getting feedback, advice, encouragement, confirmation from people you trust. But suddenly, everyone's quiet. The people who usually have answers don't know what to say. The mentors who always had wisdom are strangely silent. You're left alone with your thoughts, your doubts, and your questions. This feels like abandonment, but it's actually intimacy. God is creating space, not because He wants you to feel isolated, but because He wants you to hear His voice clearly. As long as you're surrounded by noise, you'll never develop the ability to recognize His whisper. As long as you're getting direction from everyone else, you'll never learn to discern His leading. So He quiets the room. Not to punish you, but to teach you that His voice is the only one that truly matters. If you've felt this pressure lately, you're not alone. Just type, "I hear you," in the comments. I read them. Here's what God is building in the middle of all this removal and silence. He's building real dependence. Not the kind where you pray when you're desperate and forget Him when things are good, but the kind where you wake up every morning knowing you cannot do this without Him. Where prayer isn't a routine, it's your lifeline. Where His presence isn't optional, it's essential. This part matters. He's also building obedience without clarity. This is hard for us because we want to understand before we commit. We want to see the outcome before we take the step. But spiritual maturity means moving when He says move, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when you can't see 2 feet in front of you, even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. That's not recklessness, that's trust. And He's building alignment. For too long, you've been running your own race, setting your own goals, defining your own success. God has been gracious. He's blessed your efforts. He's protected you in your independence. But now, He's inviting you into something deeper. He's aligning your will with His. And that process hurts, because it means letting go of dreams that don't fit His plan. It means surrendering timelines that make sense to you. It means trusting that His way is better, even when it feels slower, harder, and less impressive. Let that sink in. So what does this season require from you? It's not about praying more, it's about praying differently. Stop talking to God like He's a consultant you hired to improve your life. Start talking to Him like He's the Father who knows you better than you know yourself. Stop presenting your plans and asking for His blessing. Start asking what His plans are and surrendering yours. It's also about releasing control. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to recognize that some things were never yours to control in the first place. Your career, His to direct. Your relationships, His to orchestrate. Your future, His to unfold. Your job isn't to manage every detail. Your job is to trust the one who does. And it's about learning to sit in the silence without filling it. God isn't always loud. In fact, His most powerful work often happens in the quietest moments. When you stop trying to force answers and start resting in His presence. When you stop demanding clarity and start trusting His timing. When you stop equating his silence with his absence and realize that sometimes he's quiet because he's working. Most people miss this. This isn't about becoming passive. Dependence on God doesn't mean inaction. It means action rooted in his leading, not your panic. It means working hard, but from a place of rest. It means stewarding what he's given you while trusting him with what he hasn't. And here's the beautiful part. When you finally let go, when you finally stop trying to do this on your own, when you finally surrender the illusion of control, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself, because you were never meant to carry this weight alone. You were never designed to be self-sufficient. You were created for dependence, for relationship, for partnership with the God who knows exactly what you need before you even ask. This season isn't random. It's not a detour. It's not a delay. It's a divine intervention. God is breaking your reliance on yourself because he wants to give you something better. Himself, fully, deeply, completely, not as a backup plan, but as your foundation, not as an emergency contact, but as your constant companion. You're not failing. You're being redirected. You're not falling apart. You're being rebuilt. You're not losing control. You're learning trust. And on the other side of this season, you won't just have answers. You'll have him. And that's always been enough. And what God does after he breaks your self-reliance, that's where real transformation begins. If this word touched your spirit, type, "I surrender," in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is permission to stop carrying what they were never meant to hold. If this message resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And remember, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to trust the one who does. Grace and peace be with you.